One player loves tactical grid combat. Another just wants to talk to ghosts and make weird potions. And a third has enrolled initiative in 3 sessions and they are absolutely thriving. So how do you run a game that keeps everyone satisfied? Well, today on the Bearded Nerd podcast, I'm sharing strategies to balance combat, roleplay, and exploration in your campaign without burning out or forcing your players into scenes they don't enjoy. Whether you're running high fantasy, a gritty sci-fi, or something in between, these tips will help you design sessions that deliver both excitement and emotional depth. So, without further ado, let's roll initiative and roll with the story on this episode of the Bearded Nerd podcast. What we must understand is that every player leans towards different pillars within TTRPGs. You probably heard Brennan Lee Mulligan talk about schemers, swords, and seekers, right? A schemer is someone who enjoys political intrigue, a sword is someone who enjoys combat, and then a seeker is someone seeking answers to questions. And generally speaking, everyone fits into those 3. There's obviously combat and tactics. That's one pillar of a TTRPG. The roleplay and storytelling aspect, that's another pillar, with exploration and discovery as a third, and then puzzle solving and problem crunching as a fourth. Typically, though, puzzle solving and problem crunching can be in pretty much combat, roleplay, and exploration, but I separate it because there are some people who just really love to solve problems and to solve puzzles, right? So you don't necessarily need to run a perfectly even session, but you should know and you just really need to understand those pillars. And more importantly, you just need to make sure that everyone gets a turn in the spotlight. As I've mentioned before, shifting the spotlight and making sure everyone gets a chance is going to be part of this. But before we even do that, we need to understand the player pillars and their priorities. Now, let's dive into the priorities and what each of those pillars desires, right? So, a combat tactical person is going to want combat. They're going to want to fight monsters or creatures of some sort. They're going to want to create tactics and strategies to fight those monsters. They are invested in creating a character who knows how to fight and understands combat. Another person, let's say the seeker, who would really be into heavy roleplay and storytelling, is going to want answers to certain questions. They're going to dive into exploration and they're going to dive into the discovery part of the storytelling and the roleplay aspect of exploration. But they want answers. They want to understand why the kingdom does XYZ. So kind of going into the more historical components of roleplay and from a mechanical perspective, those lore checks and those history checks. But they're also going to want to seek out the cosmological answers. And then you're going to have your schemers. These are going to be your political intrigue. They want to play a game like Game of Thrones. And I have been really lucky to play in all 3 roles at one point, and I'll give you the example. So Dane Graniteheart is a character that I've been playing in a 5+ year campaign where I'm not the GM. And at first, Dane was very much a sword, wanted to be almost baptized in combat because Dane was seeking revenge for a particular thing, which was the loss of his people. And then he transformed into a seeker, seeking those answers of why why this happened and why is the world a certain way. And kind of combat and seeker or sword and seeker were balanced, let's say, but then schemer occurred later on when Dane as a character became more involved in the politics of royalty and nobility. So you can actually have a character that does all three at different points in times. But again, you need to understand what the goal is, right? The goal for a sword is to fight. The goal for a seeker is to have questions answered. And a goal for a schemer is someone to kind of be the puppeteer and pulling the strings behind certain things and certain events. Now, let's talk about how to actually create that balance. So, what I would like to say is combat is going to be important. Combat can be a narrative tool. So, when it comes to combat, layer it with story. There may be some players that don't want to partake in combat, and they may be more natural role players and storytellers, and that's great. So what we do is that we give them narrative context to every fight. We provide them risk. We provide them a story that needs to be told through the combat. And not only the narration. Yes, you can say that the sword swoops down in a perfect, beautiful, whatever arc and slashes at the enemy combatant. You could say that, and that would be appropriate. That would be a narratively contextualized or a narrative XYZ. Whatever the phrase may be, that would be narrative. But give some context, right, from a narrative perspective. Go deeper. What's at stake? Who's watching? How does this affect the world? Maybe, let's say you're in a combat situation where you're fighting in public, right? And you can even say fighting in the public square attracts the gaze of a noble faction who's watching and taking notes, right? You've answered who's watching, and the effect of the world may be public opinion, right? Because you're in a public square. And what's at stake? Maybe your honor, maybe your lives, whatever it may be, but there's something at stake. So those role play narrative heavy or role play heavy characters, player characters rather, might continue with combat and may almost explain and narrate their combat from a more cinematic perspective, but they have a fuel, they have motivation to be intrigued and to be invested and immersed into the story, and specifically the combat. Another way that you can add balance to your RPG sessions is by creating and designing social challenges as if they were combat. In a combat challenge or situation, there is tension. Lives are at stake. Choices that players make can affect the balance, and then there are good, bad, and neutral consequences. In the same or in like manner, you can create a social challenge that adds tension, allows the players to make choices, and therefore consequences result from it. It's like tracking influence, emotional stakes, or persuasion. You can even have like a little quote HP or a tracker of some sort, and I'm using heavy quotations on that, but you can even use those from a mechanical perspective, right? Let's say a heated negotiation over land deeds had occurred and maybe the persuasion failed, which then triggers a duel between the fighter or the wizard or whoever kind of struck that deal and that individual. And then from there you can say, well, there's going to be that player that's going to want to try to intercede and utilize their ability to influence. Well, you can have that occur, but you still have to have that consequence, right? So if it's a duel, maybe the duel occurs and the person who really wants to help out, you tell them, hey, the only way that this is going to turn out well is maybe you influence someone or something of that nature to kind of help them see their ways, right? You could do something like that, but designing social challenges can provide those role players and those storytellers a little bit of something, right? Or those combat heavy players that don't get enough combat time, this could be one of those moments where it's an outlet for them. Third, and one of the things that I feel is underutilized, is downtime. Downtime activities and downtime in general can be for your roleplay depth. Those quieter, less combat heavy moments where story needs to shine can be in the downtime activities or the downtime itself. And in those times where quieter or combat heavy players shine in the off time, right? Let them kind of do their thing. And this really is successful with West Marches style campaigns where every player is pursuing specific goals and specific story arcs, and everyone's kind of there in the mix. But what I like to do is I like to provide downtime activities and just downtime in general for that purpose. What this may look like is providing time for each individual to do something, right? Give them a personal scene. So this could be, for example, if a player wants to visit the grave of their family, well, let them kind of explore that. Let them dive into that and tell that part of the story to help kind of flesh out their character more and give their character more depth. It could be maybe even the wizard researching the family history of a particular NPC in the library, right? Sometimes those sessions are needed. Or maybe the paladin wants to interrogate some allies, right? Downtime is where character arcs really breathe, in my opinion. And you can actually really have a mix of it all. It's just how you explain it and how you talk about it with your friends at the table, but more importantly, how you structure it. Let me give you an example of how to structure this type of session with multiple encounter types, right? So think of it like story beats. You might have a social, a combat, and a discovery, or some tension, action, and a reward. It's going to be kind of like a 3-act session. Maybe Act 1 is a political dinner that occurs, and then Act 2 is the assassination attempt, aka combat, and then Act 3 is chase and moral decisions, right? So if you are having a session where everyone is not split, right? No one has, split into their downtime activities. Let's say the political dinner is the role play part of it. Everyone is role playing and storytelling and narrating. Maybe there's some scheming going on and everything's fine until Act 2, which is the assassination attempt. That is the combat. Everyone's fighting. You're still telling a story of how the guards of the noble lord or lady are protecting their, house, and they're falling as this happens. Kind of think of it like the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones. And then combat's over, which then leads to the seekers to chase and find out who did this, and then make a moral decision with a consequence, right? So 3 acts, boom, you're done. Now you might think to yourself, well, wait, Brian, you did say that during downtime, players could be doing different things. So how do you incorporate that? Well, here's the answer. You can have one player who maybe, let's take the example of the political dinner. You can have maybe 2 players who are participating in the dinner and they get stuck in the combat situation. Then you can have one character who maybe was in the library and they were reading, and then all of a sudden they hear something occur. So as they're trying to leave the library, they notice the door is stuck. So then now they have to figure out a way to get out. And then basically everyone's still in the same scene and in the same location, but different things are going on. So you're kind of taking this cinematic approach, if you will. I have personally run sessions where I had one party member doing one thing, maybe meditating because I'm running a Star Wars 5e game. I've had another player hacking into a particular system or mainframe in the same headquarters or base of operations, and then had another player doing some kind of, off the beat, off the cuff role play because they went to go investigate something. I had all those things happen at the same time, but because how I run sessions, I'm focusing on that individual for about 15-20 minutes and then moving on to another player. Again, I kind of section my time, which leads me into the final part of this episode. It is gain the input of your players and focus on them during the session. There will be times where the entire party is going to be doing things together. That's you and the party following the story arc. And then during downtime is when they're following personal arcs and goals and things that they want to do. That is the time where you segment sessions or segments of this session towards those individuals. So you can spend 15, 20 minutes on one player and then move on to the other player. 15, 20 minutes on that player, then move on to the other. And then just keep going from there, right? And again, during downtime, the combat lover could be training. And by them training, they gain another feat or ability or something cool that they can use in combat. Because, hey, you have to train. You have to get better. And I know plenty of people that love to play the fighter or just, martial heavy classes. And I've talked to them before about this. Anything that's going to help them be better in combat and be that tactical savant, they'll do. So get their input. Ask as well. What do you want more of? Do you want to resolve this thing or do you want to go this route? Ask your players. Get them involved. Create that buy-in from the player. And sometimes it may not be equal minutes. It may be more of an emotional weight that is reflective or shared across the party. But that is going to be important as well as equal time. And remember though, your job isn't to keep everything even, it's to keep your players engaged. So whether it's blades, words, or moments of reflection, a well-balanced session gives everyone a reason to show up and invest in the story. So prep with some purpose, run with a bit of variety, and let the pacing shift like music if need be. If you want, I have a printable combat and roleplay balance toolkit complete with design templates, session structures, and player spotlight tracking over on the Guildhall on Patreon. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with your friends and your game master. But until next time, this is Brian, the Bearded Nerd, signing off. Have a great one, and as always, keep gaming.